Welcome to Alas, Vine and Hitchens. I am Sarah Vine.
And I am Peter Hitchens.
And this week we're talking about trains, which is Peter's idea, and the weather, which is my idea. Do join us after the break. Welcome to Alas, Vine and Hitchens. I am Sarah Vine.
And I am Peter Hitchens.
With a slight delay there, Peter.
Well, I often forget.
I know how you feel. So, first of all, let's go to some post. We have post. Dear Mr. Peter Hitchens, I enjoyed hearing about your love of The Wind in the Willows, but regarding your comments on The Lord of the Rings, why do you wish for Tom Bombadil to be cheerfully strangled? The character isn't tempted by the ring, has no interest in war, and is happily content with nature and rescues those who fall into its peril. Brackets, Old Man Willow. Is it his persistent singing that irritates you, or his reluctance and aloof behaviour towards intervening with more harsh realities? Yours sincerely, Chris Davey. No relation, I assume, Chris, to Tim.
It's the singing.
It is the singing.
But it's also in the long ago days when The Lord of the Rings was just making itself into major public fame. Tom Bombadil was a favourite character among the hippies who became great readers of The Lord of the Rings, imagining it to be some sort of drug-fueled fantasy. And he was their hero, and as a result, he was not mine. But the singing is bad. Yes. Oh, Tom Bomb! I'm not going to try.
No, don't.
But it is maddening.
I never read any of the songs. I used to just to turn the pages.
Well, that's what
so
a lot
tedious.
of people do. But I thought I'd better stick with it. And as a result, I would cheerfully strangle him.
Has anyone ever tried to make it into a sort of dreadful opera? They probably have, haven't they?
Not that I know of.
Under
But what I
the
didn't
influence.
notice was that Tom Bombadil was totally absent from the film.
Yes.
And I thought that was sensible of
Yes,
you.
well done, everyone.
Yeah, leave that out.
There you go, Chris. It's the singing.
It's the singing.
Do you want to do the next one?
Indeed. Dear Sarah Vine and Peter Hitchens, this is from Jason Hollins, I should say. Many thanks to the podcast, which I find highly entertaining, intellectually fresh, and fun each week, which is what we would hope for. His question is, can either of us throw any light on the truth of Dominic Cummings' accusations, or revelations, which seem to suggest the country is wholly run by a deep state of often very young and Oxbridgey civil servants, and that our recent prime ministers, and especially the current one, are mere puppets whose cabinet meetings, and notably their conclusions, are literally pre-scripted. I think we'll leave it at that for now. There is a bit more, but I would say that Dominic Cummings is probably mistaken about that.
Well, I know Dominic Cummings very well, and he has what I would term civil service derangement syndrome, which is that he thinks every civil servant is a lunatic control freak who is an unelected, sort of scourge on society. And I think the thing is, as always with these things, and with most conspiracy theories, there's always a grain of truth. And there is definitely a grain of truth that the civil service is dominated by fairly young and fairly Oxbridgey types who do tend to think that they are rather better at governing and doing kind of policy than the people who have actually been elected to do it. And they do spend quite a lot of their time trying to coerce their secretaries of state or their ministers into sort of seeing their side of the story. I mean, the truth is that wonderful TV series, Yes, Minister, all those years ago, was basically accurate.
Well, that was the manual, but that wasn't Dominic Cummings.
And it's still
I'm
like
not
that.
a friend of Dominic Cummings, I should say. I first met him, I think, about 23 years ago.
Didn't you share a flat with him in Moscow?
Dominic Cummings, good heavens, no.
Someone shared a flat with him in Moscow.
Well, it certainly wasn't me. I
Wasn't you?
shared a flat with my wife and children in Moscow. And there was no room for Dominic.
You were probably in Moscow around the same time as him, though.
Perhaps. I'd need to check, but I didn't come across him, if so. But I did come across him in London in about 2002, 2003. And it was, in my case, loathing at first sight, which I've never got over. But which prejudices me. I would say I'm the last living partisan of the novels of C.P. Snow, who was himself for many years a senior civil servant. And he says, I was just rereading for the nth time his very fine book, Corridors of Power. He says that cynicism about the conduct of politics and the workings of the civil service is usually the province of the naive and ill-informed. That it isn't really like that.
But when was
decisions
it written?
are taken in really strange ways, but they're not taken in the cynical conspiracy fashion which the ill-informed imagine they're taken in.
But when was that book written?
It was written in the late 50s, I think.
So I think the thing is that the civil service used to be an excellent thing. But I think over the last 20 years, I would say, I think Dominic has got a point in the sense that it has become very politicised.
Well, it's been invaded by special advisors.
Well, often what happens is the special advisors get put on the civil service payroll and then they stay there as civil servants.
Also, particularly since Alistair Campbell, Birmingham played some part in this, but particularly since Alistair Campbell, the civil service has been turned into an instrument of the executive rather than an independent body.
Yes.
That is true, but that would tend to argue against what Dominic Cummings is saying.
Well, of course, Dominic Cummings
frustrates government. My complaint about the civil service is that it's the supine servant of government and doesn't get in the way enough.
Well, I think the thing about Dominic Cummings is that he has a very particular political agenda. So
I wish I could work out what it was.
In terms of his political agenda, which is essentially anarchy. I mean, he's basically an anarchist. He basically he's a destroyer of worlds, not a creator of worlds. What he always tried to do when he was in government or associated with government was he tried to undo systems that he thought were not functioning and tried to redo them in his, according to his rules. And he found a lot of opposition to that. I mean, a lot of that...
He should obviously have taken up Marxism at an early stage in his life.
Yes, I think he should have done. Maybe
he
should have shared a flat in Moscow.
Maybe we should have done, but I say it again.
But anyway...
I deny all such rumours.
Anyway, Jason, it was a very good question, and I think in answer to your question, it's yes, a bit. Another question we have here from Finbar. Congratulations on the show. I must say it has been a fantastic listen and long may it continue. Listening to a recent episode, I have to say I disagree profoundly with Peter. I mean, that isn't said often, is it, Peter? In regards to his comments regarding Northern Ireland not being a better place post the Good Friday Agreement. Being from Belfast and living through the Troubles, I see with my own eyes the living hell that time period was. I have seen. Sorry, there was a word missing there. The agreement wasn't perfect by any means, and I actually was against it at the time, but having raised my children in an era where the streets outside our home weren't on fire every night, and British soldiers didn't roam the land, I have grown to believe it was necessary. I also wanted to let Sarah know, this is very important at this point, my wife has just started listening to her new book on Audible and has been really enjoying it.
As have we all.
Thank you.
But if I could just riposte to Finbar, I didn't say anything as simple as it wasn't a better place. I mean, obviously, you can get better coffee, and Belfast has been done up at enormous expense to look like a modern city, whereas before it was the most terrible grimy mess in which almost everything was obstructed by the fact there was a war. Peace is always better than war on the surface of things. The question is, what price have you paid for it? And for some people, those people who are still being burnt out of their houses and those people who still live in areas which are entirely dominated by basically by protection racket gangs, it's not a better place than it was then. But most fundamentally, a surrender has been made to lawless violence. And that's always a bad thing. And the reason why it's been made is because people prefer the material benefits which you mentioned to the honourable course of continuing to fight. And that's always available. Peace is always available at a price if you're prepared to give away important things. I just don't think that we did. Most people in the mainland don't care, and I'm one of the few who do. But notice now, for instance, the attempted prosecution of former British Army personnel and former police personnel who were doing their job during the Troubles, and you'll see it's quite evident that it was Britain and the forces of authority which lost in the 1998 agreement, and the IRA which won.
But on the other hand, Finbar doesn't have to put up with his house being on fire.
No, he doesn't. But some people do. Some people do,
that.
And there is. It isn't reported over here, but people are still burnt out of their homes or threatened with it, and there's still a great deal of intercommunal violence and protection racketeering on a large scale.
Perhaps it's a sort of uneasy. Well, perhaps it's that thing where it's just the least bad solution to a horrible problem.
Perhaps it is, and then again, perhaps it isn't. I'm interested that people who are constantly going on about supposed appeasement of wherever it is, Russia, or are happy to defend one of the biggest instances of appeasement in modern history, namely the appeasement of the provisional IRA under American pressure, which was the 1998 agreement. Right.
Well, Finbar, I don't think that you and Peter are going to see eye to eye on this, but I think that I shall be the Kofi Annan in this room and just move on to the next question. This is from Eric. He says, Mr. Hitchens in a recent episode expressed a desire to see the Northern Lights in Norway. He lives far north of Norway, close to the Russian border, and can highly recommend it. If you ever decide to make it happen, could I buy you a beer? Peter, is this one of your, comrades sending you a covert message?
No. It's kind of I do intend to go eventually, but I intend to go by train when I do, which is possible, and also stay in a nice hotel. But if he plans to buy me a beer in Norway, he better start saving now. The last time I had a beer in Norway, it was so expensive it made me gasp.
Well, there you go. And another one. Gosh, we have so many letters. Thank you, guys.
This is from Jamie Smith, and it's Dear Sarah and Peter. One mutual area of interest between Peter and myself is the railways. I recall Peter once lamenting the loss of the Cambridge to Oxford line on a rival broadcaster. As someone who grew up in the West Country, which lost many of its vital branch lines, he's clearly as aggrieved as I am about the destruction that took place in the 1960s. As Peter has said, it is Ernest Marples who is the real culprit for this. And in his radio interview, he says someone should write a book about Marples. Well, they have, and it's called Ernest Marples, The Shadow Behind Beeching, which documents his rise to power, the swinging of the axe on the railways, and his fall from grace. I shall be ordering as soon as I have a moment. He also said he was pleased to see that I visited Devon last week, including parts of the old Dartmoor line that I used to travel on. Whilst a small part of this line has been reopened, it would be a real asset to Devon and Cornwall if it were to fully reopen. But, of course, as he rightly says, the money is not forthcoming. So a very important thing will not be done, and especially now we've got a government collapsing the economy. It won't be done for the foreseeable future. Thank you. Anyway, Jamie, it's an interesting letter on interesting subjects, and I'll find that book. And we're staying with our last email, and I'd like to talk about trains, royal trains and common trains, all of them. As the songwriter Paul Simon once said, there's something about the sound of a train that's very romantic and nostalgic and hopeful. He famously wrote Homeward Bound on the platform at Widnes railway station while waiting for a train to Manchester to play a gig. You don't get that on a smart motorway or even on a stupid one. This is all stimulated by the crazy decision by the keeper of the Privy Purse this week to scrap the Royal Train.
Insane.
Act of extraordinary stupidity, probably, as others have said this morning, probably to try and catch the headlines and draw attention away from the real problems with the royal finances, which is they've got so much money, they don't really know what to do with it, and it's quite embarrassing. But anyway, leaving that aside, the excuses made are pathetic, that they only used it a couple of times in the past financial year, and that meant each trip cost a lot of money. Well, let me explain something very basic to you about accounting. If you only use a train a couple of times, all the overheads will then be divided by 2 and loaded onto those 2 trains. If you'd used it 50 times,
exactly,
the trips would be much less costly and in the account books. But the question that really needs to be asked is, why was it only used a couple of times?
Exactly.
Why does the current king, why is he so uninterested in? Well, it lives just north of Milton Keynes in a place called Wolverhampton. It can go practically anywhere. You can put almost any engine on the front of it. It's old-fashioned carriages.
For example,
it can go anywhere.
The Waleses could use it to go to Norfolk.
Absolutely, they could.
So here's the thing. I think if you're a member of the royal family, you should travel by the safest mode of transport possible, because what we don't really want you to do is to fall out of the sky or get, in a car crash, right? So the train is a very safe it's one of the safe. I think it's incredibly safe for trains.
Oh, it's the safest method of ground transport there is.
I happen to know that the Waleses frequently use helicopters to get to their estates,
which is tremendously not safe.
Tremendously dangerous. And if one of them fell out of the sky, God forbid, we would have a constitutional crisis. So scrapping the train is ridiculous.
There's an argument for they would reply, and they have somewhere. They have an awful lot of engagements to fulfil, and therefore to be able to clatter speedily from one to the other by helicopter.
You can work on a train. You can't work in a helicopter.
I completely agree with you. It's not just that. For me, it's the only... now that the Royal Yacht has gone, which was another grave mistake, it's the only truly majestic and impressive form of transport that there is. Arriving by plane, getting out of a car, nobody looks impressive. Nobody looks like a king. Arriving by train, you do, and a train itself is
also
majestic.
The Royal Train. I think my ex-husband Michael once went to meet the king on the Royal Train, and he said it was fantastic. He said it had a proper bathroom and it's
not terribly grand.
You can live on it.
It's not terribly grand as it happens. But no, it exists. It would cost a bit of money to maintain. I would recommend, far from scrapping it, you keep the original one, and it should travel around doing progresses around the country so people can see the king, preferably with a steam engine on the front of it. Well, there is a beautiful modern steam engine, the Tornado, built in the past, which is a fine example of British achievement, and it would just make it look all the more impressive. And then you buy, hire, or build a 186 mile an 7-hour train capable of going through the Channel Tunnel, with which His Majesty can make royal visits to all those unfortunate republics which don't have kings.
Well, he very much likes
turning up. Imagine this train in royal maroon with the royal standard turning up at the Gare du Nord or the Stazione Termini in Rome or in Berlin. All these unfortunate republics with no kings, they'd be drooling with envy at the sight of it.
But also,
it wouldn't actually cost that much. So you have both. You have the ultimate. People. I had people when I complained about this on social media saying, "Oh, why are you so old-fashioned?" So trains are not. They are the most modern form of transport there is.
Absolutely.
They're also the greenest by a mile.
They're the greenest and they're the safest. And also, he likes going to Transylvania. I think it'd be fun to go to Transylvania by train.
Yes, it would be. I've been to Romania.
Those railways are meant to be amazing, aren't they?
The big mistake, there's a mistake that began all this, which made me worry about Charles, who was, I think, a bit of a petrol head with his stupid Aston Martin. He was taught to drive it by Graham Hill, the racing driver.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Ridiculous fact, but it's true. Anyway, but when he did not employ the royal train to bring Her Majesty down from Scotland to London after she died, that I thought was a terrible mistake. It would have been the most. I was one of the people who went to the lying in state at Westminster Hall, and it was an extraordinarily moving experience. Impossible to describe really how moving it was. Everybody could have had something similar if the train had been routed cleverly down from Scotland, and they have a special carriage in which the coffin could have been displayed on the catafalque, illuminated at night. And when the biggest examples of this, 1965, when Winston Churchill died, people lined the tracks for his train going down to Bladen, where he was to be buried. And when Robert F. Kennedy was murdered in 1968, I think 2 million people lined the tracks between New York and Washington. The train had to be delayed, and it was the most extraordinary display, black and white, young and old, and the people on the train could not believe how many people had turned out. Why miss that opportunity?
No, I agree. I mean, and they are also.
What is it about trains?
They're green. They're safe, but they're also incredibly romantic, and aren't they quite inspiring? And the way they sort of hiss and sigh when they come to a stop, I always quite like that. And my granny used to live at the end of behind a train line, and I used to listen to the trains coming through at night. I used to particularly like the very, you get those very long freight trains that sort of go on and on and on and on, and there's some sort of kind of almost sort of otherworldly about them. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
And I love a sleeper train to Scotland.
Yes, there's some drama and moment and significance about a journey done by train. And when I went to live in Moscow, I took the ferry to Ostend and got the through train from Ostend to Moscow. Dominic Cummings wasn't there with me. I'm glad to say.
You say that. Do you have proof?
No, but I did it because it was such a momentous journey in my life that I was determined to do it by train, not to arrive at Moscow airport with a wet wump of wheels on the tarmac. I wanted to arrive at the Belaruski station and step off into Moscow and
into a cloud of steam,
and across some frontiers, and to have seen the countryside change and the colour of the grass and the trees alter as it does across Europe.
And of course, my generation, we all went interrailing.
Yeah.
And that was a great sort of rite of passage. You'd sort of potter around the whole of Europe on variously fast, slow, useless, good, bad trains. And it is just, you get a sense of the culture and the people and where you are. Whereas if you just get on an airplane and fly somewhere, you arrive at the other end, you don't see any of the bits in the middle.
It's the great tragedy of the budget airlines that there was about to be, after the Eurostar began, there was about to be a new era of train travel and it killed it.
Yeah.
Because suddenly it became really quite comparatively expensive.
I mean, the other thing that kills
it's ridiculous, isn't it? The train travel is more expensive than going by
it is insane. I mean, for example, going to Manchester, I go to Manchester a lot because my daughter's at university there, and going to Manchester by train is more expensive than flying to Manchester by aeroplane. How ridiculous is that?
It's ludicrous.
I mean, it's also more expensive than driving there, which is, so it is bonkers. I think one of the big problems is that, particularly in this country, the trains have become so rubbish. They're so useless. Some lines are just unbelievably bad.
We have in this country and have had for many, many years, an anti-railway government.
Yeah. But why? Why?
Because
It
it's
doesn't make any sense.
dominated by the road lobby, the car lobby, the lorry lobby particularly. They have for many years dominated policy.
Also, the one thing I don't understand about this country, and I genuinely don't understand this, and if I were Prime Minister, I would do this as my first thing on my list. I don't understand why we don't charge for motorways. It's insane. Everybody else charges for motorways.
We do for some of them.
No, we don't. You should pay a toll like you do in Europe to go on a motorway. The point is, because it's ridiculous that we have free motorways because they cost a fortune to maintain, and it encourages people to use cars when they probably don't need to use their car. But you've got to try and you could finance better trains, better train lines.
I understand that people drive cars because generally they're forced to by circumstances.
Rain.
And I sympathise with them, although I hate cars and wish they'd never been invented. I understand why people drive them, why they have
but you don't have to use your car all the time.
You shouldn't bash people out of their cars or try to do so. You should encourage them out of their cars. And what the government has done for a very long time is it fears the popularity of the railways. It knows people want to travel by them, so it keeps the fares high, which keeps people off them. Because if they kept the fares at the kind of rates you find in continental Europe, then they would have to expand them. And they don't want to do this. So that policy has to end. There has to be a major rebuilding of railway lines to the places which are deprived of them. So travelling by train becomes practical. Then people will stop travelling by car so much.
Well, it used to be practical. I mean, my grandfather used to travel from Bickley to Westminster every day by train.
Yes, but the huge number of people in this country live in market towns. 12, 15,000 people living. These were the places which had railway stations until Ernest Marples came and took them away. Okay. And if you can't begin your journey by train, you won't do it by train because the way you begin your journey is the way you carry on, and that's why people gave up. If you want to drive 20 miles to a railhead and pick up a train, who's going to do that?
Well, I agree with you. That doesn't really make sense.
But if every major town and every medium-sized town had a railway station, people would use them more.
Completely agree.
But it's that killing off of them. The logic of the beaching cuts, where they said, these minor lines, they don't make any money, we close them. It's like closing Acacia Avenue because it doesn't make a profit. It's a ludicrous argument.
It is a ludicrous argument.
But people actually bought it. Yeah. Just as some idiots bought the argument that the Royal Train was not being used enough, therefore it should be shut. The response is, so use it more.
Well, also, the other thing about the Royal Train is you could actually let ordinary people take a trip on it. I would pay quite a lot of money to go on the Royal Train. It'd be great for weddings, bar mitzvahs, that kind of thing.
You could use it as garden parties are used. Yeah. You could invite people to sit.
But you could pick people up on it.
You could invite people to.
They could be the garden party train.
Yeah, exactly.
And
the royal family could amble down the train, shaking people by the hand, and they could sit and have a good time. There's so many things you can do.
I think we should be put in charge of the Royal Train, and we can commercialise it and make it.
I'd love that.
Make it run a profit.
I'd love that.
Exactly.
I wouldn't mind if it made a profit or not, but you could certainly make it viable, and it would be incredibly popular. People would rise in fury at the idea of it being abolished if that happened.
Do you think that there's going to be a royal e-bike or a royal e-scooter? Do you think Charles is going to be seen scooting around on a...
Charles, no. But there are quite a lot of others. I'm not absolutely sure who guarantee that the others wouldn't do that.
Yes.
I was crashed into an e-scooter on Monday.
No, are you okay?
I'm fine. He came shooting down an alleyway and hit me in the front wheel.
Oh my gosh! Oh, in your car?
No, on my bike.
On your bike? Wow.
Yeah, but I managed to stay upright, and I also managed to explain to him in some detail just exactly how and why he was in the wrong. And by great good fortune, my bike was made of such stern stuff that once we'd straightened out the handlebars, it was fine.
Good. Well, I'm glad that you are okay. I'm sure he's not. This is Alas, Fine and Hitchens, asking all the big questions. When we come back, I'll be talking about this infernal weather. Stay tuned. Welcome back. I am Sarah Vine, and I am jolly hot and have been all week. And I'm quite cross because the whole point of this country is that we have a nice temperate climate that rains most of the time. And that's actually...
Where does it say that in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights?
Well, it should say that. It should be, it should be a sort of an Englishwoman's right to be either wet or cold, but certainly not exposed to glaring hot sun and terrible temperatures. And in fact, the only reason I didn't that I came back to this country. My parents, foolishly, madly, moved to Italy, which is a very hot country.
Yes.
And it is very hot a lot of the time in Italy. And, summer starts at about the sort of mid-March and ends about mid-October. And for that period, you are required to go outside and be in the sun and do sunny things like, play tennis and swim and walk around and pick flowers, all the things I hate doing, because I like to sit inside in the dark reading a book. That's my idea of heaven. So I moved back to this country thinking I can come back to England and it will be reliably gloomy and I won't have to get a tan or wear a bikini, which I hate doing, or shave my legs or my toes or worry about my bikini line or any of those things that you have to do if you have to expose yourself to the sun the whole time. And then I discovered that it's actually recently I know this is global warming and, that's the real reason. Please don't write in. But the point is, I'm very upset about it. And I'm taking it very personally. I am taking it very personally.
Have you been reading one of those very old-fashioned travel guides in which English gentlemen took their hat off to you in the tube and we all wore tweed pajamas by night?
And everyone plays golf and it's the lawn. You have to have tea at 5.
It was never like that. It does get hot in summer in this country.
Yes, no, it does. It
has always done this.
It always has done, that's true, yes.
If you read the wonderful novel The Go-Between I mentioned before, it is actually about a heat wave in 1900.
Yes, wasn't there a heat wave? There was a famous 1970. Was it the 1976 heat wave?
76, oh, absolutely. It was intolerable. Yes. But it did eventually come to an end.
Yes.
They appointed a minister for rain.
Did they?
Oh, yes.
No, they
Dennis
didn't.
Howell was his name. And almost immediately after his appointment, it began to rain. So his
it works.
political career was attended with some success.
Well, I have to say, the main people who suffer from the heat are, of course, my dogs. And it has a terrible effect on them. And not to put too fine a point on it, makes them shit everywhere, which drives me mad because it's terrible. They get terrible. My Labrador gets terrible diarrhea in the heat for some reason I don't really understand, but she does. So that was quite unpleasant this morning when I came down.
To you.
What, get rid of my dog?
No, I would never dream of saying such a thing to anybody. Have you toyed with the idea of installing air conditioning?
Well, the thing is, because this is all about the global warming, and air conditioning is very bad for the environment.
Well, that's something you'll just have to put up with. I promise you that in the capital of green sentiment, Washington, D.C., where I lived for a couple of years, air conditioning is widely used.
Widely
in fact, the whole place, particularly in August, would be uninhabitable.
Exactly.
If it were not so. And when I lived there, we belonged to a swimming pool, which was a huge solace in June and July. When August came around, it was also the season of thunderstorms, and all the pools closed. They were, in any case, by that time, lukewarm and very unrefreshing. The only thing to do was to hide in the shade in your air-conditioned house, and
I can remember
not come out unless you absolutely have to, except to dash into your air-conditioned car.
Well, a friend of mine on the paper, a colleague of mine, has recently bought himself an air conditioning unit.
Yes.
So I am considering investing in one of those. But the thing I remember in Italy, it's
very good.
I remember when you would get the water in the hose would be the temperature of a cup of tea.
Well, that's no good.
That's how hot the water used to be.
I'm baffled by people going on holiday in the Caribbean.
No, I'm completely amazed by why do they do that?
I've never done it, but I was working in Cuba once, and the opportunity came one afternoon to slip into the sea near Havana. And I did this, and it was like a bath. What's the point of this?
Yes.
The whole point of the sea has to be cold. What are you doing? And I got straight out again. Why would you want to do that? But it happens, and there are parts of the world we get an awful lot of the year where it's not that hot. But while it is, I think if it bothers you that much, I think air conditioning is.
Or Norway. I could ring up this nice man from Norway. Maybe he would.
I think it can get quite hot in Norway in the high summer.
I think it probably can. But the thing is, what I realised long ago is that sort of the Brits kind of sneer at the continentals for basically going to sleep for the whole of August. But now that it's becoming as hot as it is in Europe in sort of June, July, August, you realise it's impossible to work. My brain doesn't really work over 35 degrees centigrade.
I'll have to try and translate that into a proper temperature.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm very foreign.
Continental. It's 95.
Is it 95? Yes, basically, once the temperature reaches 35, my brain stops working.
Well, that's not, because it's very near body temperature. It probably does. I'll tell you one other small trick. If you like getting outdoors a bit, find a patch of dense woodland, natural air conditioning. If you don't have air conditioning in your house, if there is woods nearby, if you get into woods, it's amazing natural air conditioning.
Yes. Well, anyway, I think maybe it's also because I'm Welsh, and in Wales we have that fantastic horizontal rain. It's basically like someone throwing a bucket at you. I'm used to that. I like that. I grew up swimming in Rossilli Bay, which is very cold.
It sounds cold.
Because it's freezing. I mean, really
sounds
properly
cold
freezing.
And grey.
Yeah, very cold, very grey.
Enticing.
Very bracing.
Yes.
Very bracing. Yes. So, okay, maybe I will get an air conditioning. I did enjoy driving around London in a very cold Uber the other day. I was committed. I considered just staying, and it was an electric Uber, I should point out. So
I wouldn't be a bit surprised.
Please don't write in.
I don't think I've ever been in one. But talking of Norwegians again, the great explorer Roald Amundsen, who I've probably mispronounced, he said,
have you made him up?
No, he's the man. He's the man who got to the South. He's the man who beat Captain Scott to the South Pole. But he said that no such thing as impossible weather. It's only the wrong clothes. And I think that could extend to there's no such thing as weather that's too hot. There's only not having air conditioning.
Okay. Do you have air conditioning?
Each year that goes by, we're quite well ventilated where I live. We have an old-fashioned house. You can open the windows and they're reasonably big. It can be made tolerable, but each year that goes by, I consider particularly putting it in bedrooms for sleeping purposes.
But also, I have to say, in hot countries, they build houses to withstand the heat. The problem with houses in the UK is
wonderful shutters they put on, thick stone walls. Yeah.
In this country, everybody does that thing of putting a massive glass box on the back of their garden and then wonders why they're basically broiling alive in the.
But I think George I, when they brought him over from Germany to be king, complained, the thing they call summer here is just 2 hot days and a thunderstorm, which has always been basically the case.
Yes.
It can get, but generally it doesn't endure for all that long. But if it does, I would have thought we're going to have to start thinking seriously about air conditioning. If you've ever lived as we did with central air conditioning, it's such a joy. It's expensive to run, but it is expensive to run. But so central heating.
But doesn't it just make the problem worse? Isn't it then a vicious circle that we're all cooling our houses and heating the atmosphere, and then the world's getting hotter?
Well, that depends on what your religious beliefs are, really, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, surely
I'm not a warmist, you see, so I don't worship at the church.
So you don't
Church of Monbiot.
You don't think this is global warming? You just think
I don't think there is global warming. I'm not wholly convinced that you can cause it by having air conditioning on.
I suppose so. But Sadiq Khan is very against air conditioning. You're not allowed to have air conditioning on. Like the Tube doesn't have air conditioning in this country.
Well, I thought they'd started to install.
I think some lines do, but most of them don't. And actually, it's impossible.
Yes, it can be. But the brilliance was what I think that they said, we're not having air conditioning, but also you can't open the windows anymore. That was the real trick. Genius. They worked on.
And all the buildings are made of glass.
A real top thinker who came up with that combination.
This very high tech.
Yes, if you listen carefully, you can hear the whoomp.
Which you can hear.
Sarah's fan.
It's a fan, and it's lovely, and I can hide behind it as well.
Always have a fan with you.
Yes, I always have a fan with me. And on that note, I think we're done. Thank you for listening to Alas, Fine and Hitchens. We will be back next week. Don't forget to check out what?
It's a bold claim.
Well, all things being equal, we will be back next week. Don't forget to check out this week's reading list, watch list, and share the books, TV and films you think we might want to read or watch. For that or anything else, email at alas@mailonline.co.uk, or you can leave a comment on Spotify, or even send us a voice note on WhatsApp 077 96 657 512, and please start your message with the word alas. Until next week.